Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to you today, wherever you are in the world. Our audience are mainly in the UK and US, but as you can see, we also have lots of attendees from numerous locations. We are also broadcasting from 4 different locations today, 2 of which are in London, 1 in Dallas, Texas, and 1 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And that's the power of remote technology. So thank you for joining us during these somewhat strange circumstances we are currently living under. My name's Michael Winters, and I'll be moderating the session today. I'm the UK Business Development Contact for Online Rewards, also covering Europe and beyond. I've worked in the employee reward and recognition and employee benefits sector for over 15 years now across a very broad range of industry sectors. Today's webinar is hosted by Online Rewards, ably supported by AIRWAYS UK and Rewards Consulting, entitled Make Your People Proud, Creating a Purpose-Driven Organisation, and is part of our Best Practices series. By way of brief background, Online Rewards is a leading global provider of bespoke online reward solutions with key offices in the US and UK, with a significant portion of our output within the employee reward and recognition sphere. So before we begin properly, onto some general housekeeping. Duration is set for 1 hour. However, we do have the option to run over for an extra 15 minutes if there are a significant amount of participant questions. The format of the webinar will be some presentations, including some interactive poll questions, and hopefully gauging your opinions along the way. To conclude the webinar, there will be a question and answer session, some of which will have been sent in advance and the remaining posted during the webinar. So we welcome all your input, so please feel free to post questions throughout the webinar in the message chat feed at the foot of the tab, and we will save them all until after the presentations. Furthermore, there will be a recording of the session available afterwards for playback or to pass on to any relevant colleagues and friends. And so to begin, we have 2 presenters today, both of whom are very respected industry professionals, all called Michael. Somewhat confusing and repetitive with 3 Michaels on the presenting side, so apologies for that. Thankfully, our technical support on the session today is Jim. And so to our presenters, the first of which is Michael Levy, CEO of Online Rewards, instrumental in delivering over 400 plus global programs, specializing in the employee recognition field, and a much respected industry speaker. The second is Michael Rose, an independent reward consultant, including advisory and consultancy roles with Arthur Andersen and KPMG. He has also held a number of corporate positions, the last being Director of Reward for Aon UK and EMEA, an accomplished public speaker and author of numerous books and articles in the reward and recognition sphere. Okay, to our first speaker, I will now pass you over to Michael Levy to begin. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for the introduction, Michael. Good to have you all today, wherever you're connecting to us from, and to give it another dimension, there's also going to be different accents. You're hearing a Texas softened Australian accent. I grew up in Sydney, Australia, but have been living in the United States proudly for the last 20 years. Although at some point I hope that I would spend some time in London, and may that be part of the future, if that's a possibility. So I got involved in the business of reward programs associated with my wife's fascination with airline miles and collecting of airline miles. And I found it a curiosity as to why is it that people do some rather unusual things in order to collect their airline miles. And that got me interested in looking at points programs. To cut a long story short, in 2002, fortuitously connected and was introduced to some gentlemen in Cincinnati, Ohio, who are my business partners who are technology backgrounds. And in the period between 2002 and 2020, we've built quite a substantial business in the area of building custom reward programs. And the populations for the reward programs would vary depending upon what the objectives and what the behavior changes, but many of those were employee-facing situations. You know, what are we going to do for our employees, and what's the roles of points? So quite a few of them would deploy programs where there were monetary type awards, and you get points and you cash your points in for high street retailers or merchandise or travel and experiences, etc. And then an interesting observation took place. Pull up this slide. That is a couple of the clients at an earlier stage, I think around 2008, 2009, where some constraints on budgets were happening, started to pull back the points aspect of their programs and place a greater emphasis, really forced to keep the programs going, but not having a lot of points. And I expected that there would be a significant decrease in the utilization of the program, potentially the impact of the program, but was surprised to see that people actually liked and appreciated the recognition of itself. So that gave us some sort of new direction and confidence that actually recognition is important. So why, the question is, recognition important, and why is it consequentially important at the HR perspective, looking at the employee populations? Well, it becomes particularly impactful when you look at the question of employee performance, productivity, and their experience with a lens of their, on one side from the employee's point of view, what's their experience and how are they experiencing work at a certain company? Conversely, from the company, how are we getting the most from our employees, as the objective is we're hiring them and we want to make them successful, but we also want their contributions to be as impactful as possible to the business. And we observed this very interesting, work proud productivity curve, or engagement curve, or discretionary effort curve. And what that was we have got two employees. There's John and Joe, and John and Joe have got basically the same function, and John and Joe are basically the same pay rate, and John and Joe work about the same number of hours, and John and Joe are friends. But there's a real difference between the output from John and Joe. And the question we all should ask ourselves is, why is there such a difference? Why is it that John has this kind of productivity output and Joe in the red has the lower productivity output? And in summation, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, it is the decisions by John and Joe of the level of effort they wish to provide and the contributions they make on their day-to-day job performance that produces the delta. And the delta can be very significant, especially when you look at it cumulatively across a whole organization. And the delta is, I'm going to do the absolute minimum I need to do in order to make sure I don't get fired, versus I want to do as much as I can because I get a lot of job satisfaction and I think my work is meaningful and I think the work of the company is meaningful and I'm going to do my job well. And that can have consequentially a huge financial impact to the business. So the question is, how does one quantify that? And to that end, I was lucky enough to meet a very fine gentleman, Michael Rose, who I'm asked to come and speak and present, share some of his learning and expertise to say, what is the point of view when you look at that question from the comp standpoint, and how important is that discretionary effort, and how does one tap into that discretionary effort if it is that important? Just because topically we're in this time and everybody's working at home, I thought it'd be interesting to share a data point from a program of where we had good activity in the program in terms of the users logging in and participating, and the number of recognitions, etc. And how interesting it's been to see that in this time where we're working more remotely and we're not as connected to each other as we normally would in the day-to-day, the activity levels in sharing appreciation and recognition has risen dramatically, actually threefold in the period. And I think that's an interesting testimony to say, well, it obviously must be having value, and it may be having particular value in this time. Naturally, there's going to be a point where we're not all remote and working at home coming soon, but it's sharing us and telling us in this data, this is important to people. This is important to people. So with that, I'll pass it across to Michael Rose. Michael, thanks for being available and sharing your knowledge and expertise with some of the folks today.
Thanks very much indeed, Michael. Hello, everybody. Pleased to be here. I'm not going to go through what I've been doing. You can see some stuff there, and Michael's very kindly already said a few things. Let me start by giving some framing issues to what I'm going to be talking about today, building on what Michael's already said. Because I think one of the issues that's around at the moment is this issue of corporate purpose. So that's the first point, redefining purpose. And I don't know whether anybody on the call saw this, but in the US, the Business Roundtable issued a statement on the purpose of the corporation in August last year. And rather than the conventional emphasis being on long-term value for shareholders, they issued a statement which said that they were going to give a commitment to all their stakeholders, much more balanced. And they said that it was going to be about value for our customers, investing in our employees, dealing fairly and ethically with our suppliers, supporting the communities in which we work, and then also generating long-term value for shareholders. And it seems to me that this whole issue of organizational purpose has been changing quite a lot over the years, certainly since I did economics and we looked at what's the purpose of the firm. And if we just look at things like CSR, environmental issues and so on, that seems to be happening, has happened a lot. And I think at the moment, as we're looking at the crisis that we're in at the moment, as we see different organizations reacting in different ways, some seeming to be aligned with some values around the relationship between themselves and the community, others doing something different. I think we're starting to see maybe the purpose and the way in which organizations, corporations in particular, are operating is being redefined. And that seems to be one important factor. And part of that, therefore, seems to me to be around what does that mean about the impact of the work of people in those organizations? And having work which then makes impact, work which is meaningful, work that matters, becomes part of that whole change. One of the ways the organizational purpose may be changing is the way in which people they're investing in their employees, and certainly gaining a purpose that people support, and they can see a line of sight between what they're doing and an organizational purpose that they support, which has got a wider purpose than perhaps today, can be very significant for employees in businesses. And the following link to that is therefore making sure that whatever values we've got are also aligned to either the new purpose or whatever the purpose is. And I'm sure I won't embarrass anybody on the call, but when I meet new clients and we talk about their values, if they've already got them, what I always ask is, are they real? Are they embedded? Do people understand them? Does the leadership support them and drive them? Or do they just kind of sit around and they don't really connect? And I'm afraid too many times it's the latter, not the former. But really getting realistic aligned values, which supports the whole kind of purpose piece. But of course, to do that, we need leadership role modeling. And whatever else we do, unless you've got leadership role modeling of the values and supporting the purpose, there's going to be a problem. And trust and follow through. You know, somebody said to me once, as long as you've got trust in an organization, the other factors are less important, because you've got the support of the people in the organization is critical. So support and follow through. Excuse me. And it seems to me that if we can get kind of rethinking around some of those things on the left-hand box, then we can generate an environment where we've got some alignment, which leads to organizational pride of people in the business who are intrinsically motivated. And it's a great little example that Michael gave earlier about this relationship as well. You know, we take the points away and hey, people just like the recognition. It's about reinforcing intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic. So aiming or kind of seeking to emphasize intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivation is critical, and that can lead to or be part of the whole kind of change on engagement. And we know that engagement is significant. But there's a problem at the moment that there seems to be, here's a piece of data quoted in the Harvard Business Review last year, that only 28% of employees actually feel connected to their company's purpose. Now, whether that's because it's been badly defined, it's not emphasized, it hasn't got life, it's not the purpose that people subscribe to, is difficult to say from that, but you can certainly look it up, or I can give you the citation. but there's certainly a big gap there, isn't there? And I think we're in a moving space now between defining organizational purpose and then driving it through so it's really realistic and meaningful and aligns with what people actually want to do in the company they work for. Here's another quote I found, which I think is highly supportive of the direction I'm taking this, which is, you can read it: people who find meaning in their work don't hoard their energy and dedication. They give them freely, defying the conventional economic assumptions about self-interest. They grow rather than stagnate. They do more and they do it better. So this again is taking the same point, isn't it? Which is saying, look, you know, the old model of what I learned when I did economics many years ago, you know, rational economic man, people are self-interested, and maybe something of the old Theory X model, is not one which has legs any longer. And it's much more about ensuring that we have people, give people meaningful work. And as you know, what you say, if you want people to do a good job, give them a good job to do, have meaning, find meaning in their work, and they do the requirement of the sort of externalized, extrinsic motivation that's assumed or has been assumed in the past to be critical is really not there. So I think that's really all about the intrinsic over the extrinsic. Now, I mentioned a moment ago about the positioning of values, and I've seen a load of different values in different organizations, and I often use this slide to talk about, you know, if we were doing a session on developing reward strategy, then what's that relationship? And it seemed to me, you can glance through eyes over this one, and you know, even use the pronoun we for everything. It's just got 4. They're kind of nicely written, and I would say these are well written values. And these are the sort of things which you could see would fit into an organization which has a solid purpose, and a purpose which is maybe as balanced as the sort of thing I was talking about earlier. The only problem is when I tell you where this quote, this quoted set of values comes from, and it was actually last seen when it was published in the 1998 report and accounts. In fact, the very final report and accounts issued by Enron before they went bankrupt a couple of years later. And the cause of the bankruptcy, and if you look it up, you'll see that, is fraud at the top. So if you want to see a great example of the gap between the sorts of things that are said and the sorts of things that are done, just look at this value set. And I suppose all I'm really saying here is, look, you know, we're in a tough place in the HR world, in the compensation world, in the benefits world, in that, you know, you can only work where things work well from the top. And it's the people at the top that are going to have to set the agenda, but we're going to have to be there to influence them. Let's just take a break out for a second now. Let's just give a couple of quick poll questions that I'd like people to answer. So let me just ask Jim to take over this and then set this poll question going. What makes your employees most proud of your company, of your organization? What do you think? So Jim, please just run that poll. So as you can see, sorry, I could say, so you can see what makes your employees most proud of your company, and just select one of those, please. Just select one of those, and then when we've got enough people through, then Jim will close that and we can all see the results. So just select one of those only, and then submit. And Jim, when you think we've got enough there, then maybe you can just run the answers.
Great, looks like we've got about 70% showing, so I will share the results with everyone.
Okay, so reasonable balance between positive culture and purpose and mission. Well, that's interesting, and let's hope that, and be interesting to pick up any questions around that those are dominant, which is assuming therefore people have got positive culture that people subscribe to and believe in purpose and mission, and then contribution to society third, and its financial performance is right at the bottom. So there's a very interesting view of this population of what makes people proud. So that's an interesting one around the company itself. So we've got purpose and mission and positive culture. The next one is, the second question is, what makes your employee most proud of their work? So if we just differentiate, so if we can just open that poll up, please, Jim. So we've talked about what they may be proud about the corporation, the company. What makes your employees most proud of their work, of how they are working? And again, please select one and press submit, and then we'll run that answer as well. And again, let's see what we've got when we get there. We're doing, Jim?
All right, looks like we are close to 70% voting on this one as well. So
Okay.
go ahead and share the results.
Interesting. So work achievement is by far the strongest, followed by feedback, compensation low, job low, and then other fine. So work achievement, and it's very interesting that, and there's actually a very strong relationship between work achievement and feedback, because we'll talk about this in a minute. But getting achievement and getting feedback for that achievement is often the kind of the great position to have. And as Hertzberg said, you know, recognizing and giving feedback when it is not about real work achievement, it's not real performance, is a problem. So work achievement, and so therefore perhaps what we should be looking at is how do we maximize that value, that work achievement value. Okay, great, thank you very much for those. So let's just move on and just pick up some points around this area of this feedback point and recognition stuff. Now there's loads of work around, loads of research around about how recognition has a significant impact on engagement. And I'll just show you mention the one piece of information which I think is the research, which I think is great, which is from the Gallup organization. And I'm sure many of you know about the Gallup Q12, which is 12 statements, which they say are all about the combination of those give you an indication of the degree of engagement in the organization. And that this one, in the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work, is one of those 12. And they also say, actually, it's one of the strongest correlated to high levels of engagement. But some research that Gallup put out showed that only 1 in 3 workers actually strongly agree with that statement. So it certainly suggests there's a big gap in most organizations between this statement, which is a very powerful driver of engagement where the scores are high, and the level to which people strongly agree to that. The other thing that Gallup said about this, which was an interesting point in relation to the way we're discussing it today, is that Gallup said employees need constant feedback to know if what they are doing matters. What they are doing matters. And I think that's a really strong point, because that links surely back to this whole point of purpose and impactful work. And so this isn't just saying recognition for doing a good job, good work is great of itself, which of course it is, but it's actually saying I need reassurance, but what I am doing matters, that I have value as an individual, and that is important. And a quick definition, if you like, of what I see is recognition, and that's this one: catch people doing something right. So there are loads of definitions of what recognition is, but I would say, for my purposes, then we'll use the Blanchard and Johnson. You know, catch people doing something right. We're very good at catching people doing something wrong. But without getting into huge analysis of the detail of the way these things, you know, the research that's done, just look at this quote from a few years ago, a CIPD report a few years ago. If you want to see the damage of poor recognition, recently we were very busy and a few of us worked a lot of hours to help out, but you didn't get any thanks for it. We just were not appreciated at work. And if someone were looking for a job, I wouldn't tell them to get one where I work. Now, this is not somebody who's proud of their organization. Frustratingly, of course, in this example, Susan is probably proud of her work. She's just not proud of the way she's treated in the organization. And so that certainly is a good example of how things can go very badly wrong. And it seems to me that what we need in recognition is some clarity on taking a strategic view, because we know that engagement, one of the things that's driving engagement, one of the things that's driving pride in people at work is recognition, a need for recognition. And I think we've got two ways to go. Either you get a recognition scheme and off the shelf, and people are often doing that, and that's sometimes the first place to go, and I don't recommend it. Or you take a strategic approach to recognition and then determine what your needs are in terms of systems and online and so on and so forth. And that second approach of taking a strategic approach to recognition is really impactful, because it's about embedding it, because strategic recognition is not just a scheme off the shelf, which is just the whatever somebody else wants to sell you, but it's actually being a much more engaged approach. So it's part of how engagement surveys and exit interviews and determining where the gap is. It's part of culture. Recognition is about one of the ways things are done around here. I always take the view on everything, actually, and recognition is one of them, that it should be about best fit, not best practice. It's just not good enough just to say, well, I'll buy one of those and then we've done recognition. What's going to work for your organization? The penultimate one, part of management training, is one that never fails to amaze me, actually, and I've done a number of pieces of work and research for some of the books and stuff on this one. And one of the questions I ask people when we talk about their recognition programs is what's in your management training around recognition? So we've got a scheme, we've got a recognition program, but where's it in management training? And the answer has been typically, mostly, either I don't know or it's not there. We've got this big gap. So one of the strategic components here has got to be about joined up thinking. So it seems to me incredible, really, that people in an organization may say, well, we have got recognition done because we bought a scheme, but they haven't got anything in the management training model development about how you operate effective recognition. What is recognition about? So taking a strategic approach, which then goes through all the way through to making sure that it's role modeled at the top, but just taking a strategic approach to make sure that we're developing something that's going to work for the organization. And if we think about the purpose and what sort of an organization we want to be, then we find the strategic model that's going to work. Now, if we think about the relationship between recognition and reward for a moment, and think about where it makes impact. This was a nice piece of research that I picked up from McKinsey. They did this a few years ago now, but it's a great piece of data, because McKinsey are, as you know, a very significant strategy consultancy working with many of the biggest organizations in the world. And look what they say here, that they found that praise from the immediate manager, leadership attention, or chance leader projects can be equal to or more effective than some of these conventional compensation programs. That isn't to say we shouldn't pay people a bonus or pay cash or use stock and so on and so forth. But if we think about getting value, then the impact that those things at the top, and particularly the first two, are really all around recognition, can deliver greater impact and can have more effect on motivation, engagement, pride in the organization than those three at the bottom. So I think when we think about the relationship between reward and recognition, we should bear that in mind. And picking up a point Michael made earlier around, when things were financially not so great in the economy and organizations were looking to drop the number of points. Certainly when I found a few years back, when we had something of a recession, I found clients phoning me to say, well, look, we don't have the money. What else can we do? What about this recognition thing? And whilst I would be looking at it more positively, actually it meant that quite a few organizations started to look at just recognition. Unfortunately, at that time, it was because we didn't have the money. And it's not a nil-sum game, but nevertheless, it did lead people to think about that some more. But one of the things we can certainly do, I think, is define what the relationships are between some of these things. And I'm not sure whether British Airways still do this. I think they've probably got some bigger problems on their plate at the moment. But they had a while back in some research I did for my first book on the subject, this really neat way of just thinking about these different components. And whether you like the words they've used or whether you subscribe to those or you use different words, I think it'd be fantastic if organizations could think about things like pay and incentives and benefits and recognition and just have one bullet with 5 or 6 words for each to say the essence of what they are. And I think that would be a very helpful way to try to differentiate in people's minds the relationships between these things, because they are different. Recognition is all about intrinsic motivation, and incentives are all about extrinsic motivation. And we can see that in this comparison chart here. The impact for recognition is around the message as opposed to the prize. It's not about having high value, it's about the behaviors of people. It costs almost nothing or very little compared to bonuses and salary and stuff. If you want the theory, it's reinforcement as opposed to expectancy. And at a sort of basic level, recognition is really more about as being a gift, whereas the incentive stuff is really a contractual relationship of one kind or another. And so I think if we're thinking about how can we build up recognition to support the sort of engagement, to support the purpose of in the organization, to ensure as far as possible people are proud of working for the organization, are proud of the meaningful work they're doing. And you've said in the survey poll that achievement at work is a significant driver of pride, then we need to think about how we might put together recognition. And I see that as a program, if you like, developing a program which is a continuum or a journey from the informal to the formal. So the informal recognition stuff costs very little. As you get formal, it gets more and more. And I think we can think about it in these 3 components, and starting with day-to-day recognition, which is not much more than saying hello, thank you, how are you, recognizing individuals and recognizing it at a very basic day-to-day polite level almost. Then getting into more local, informal, low-key, simple, maybe some basic online stuff in the middle, and then you can get to the more formal corporate high profile. Now, as I said earlier, many organizations start with the scheme, but I suggest that actually what we should do is start from the day-to-day. This is where you can build pride, you can reaffirm meaning and impact of roles, and this is all about management behavior. It also actually costs very little compared to the more formal, and certainly one of the things I get to talk to people about is how do we budget for our recognition. And one of the things that I think is always worth looking at is this whole gamification area, something that Michael or others can talk about in more detail. But if you come across this is not the idea that you actually have online programs where people can have some outcomes, or variable outcomes, rather than just a prize. So instead of just saying, well, here's some points or here's this, you can play a game to get something, and that can both help budget, but also it shows, the psychologists tell us, it's as impactful as giving a prize is actually the ability to play a game and actually potentially win a prize. But also, as I say, one of the big advantages is you can budget for it precisely. So last slide from me now is this last one about non-cash, which is just throwing this one at the end, but it's important, which is that the extent to which you see recognition as a means by which you can encourage greater pride in the organization, get engagement and so on and so forth, you may wish to have some sort of prizes, or you may wish to do something tangible. And if you do, then I would argue not to have cash, but to use something else. And it's for these reasons, to start on the right, because something rather than cash has memory value. You never remember your last bonus a year later or your paycheck. It can be more personal to the individual. It's about something that's going to be of value to them. And of course, something tangible can have a higher perceived value. It's what I've also called display value. You can talk to your neighbors about, I just got this bottle of champagne, or we went out for dinner on the company, more than you would tell them about your last bonus. And finally, differentiation, and this is really an important one, that if you use if for recognition you use cash, then I can give you lots of examples of where this just gets confused in the minds of the giver and the receiver as to what this is about. Is this all about cash? Is this really kind of a bonus? Is this about the target, or what is this? But actually recognition isn't about that. Recognition, if we come back right to the beginning, is about catching people right and the huge amount it can do to achieve that. So let me pass over now to Michael Levy to take the last section before we then go into a Q&A, at which time I'll be pleased to answer any other questions you've got about my piece. Michael, over to you.
All right, thanks, Mike Rose. Appreciate that. And Mike was I believe, in summation, arguing from a professional whose career has been in the comp design strategy, comp design development for big corporates globally, that recognition and feedback has a role. And I think it was interesting in the questions that were asked in the poll survey amongst ourselves, and we've got predominantly HR business leaders, not frontline on the call, but they did acknowledge that, actually being proud of the company's, purpose was an important thing. So how do we connect, how do we develop a culture where the purpose of a business is seen as a positive attribute and something that is attractive to employees? And then secondarily on the question, we asked is, well, what makes individuals feel proud of the work they do? Pride in the company and what the company's mission is. And then how do you feel a sense of pride, or what makes you as an individual within a large organization proud of the work you do? Feedback and achievements. Feedback and achievements, not the comp. And none of this, of course, is to say that compensation strategies are not highly important. Of course they are. They are highly important in making sure that you are at least within market and that you're attracting the type of talent and hopefully also retaining the talent. However, they're very expensive, they're very inflexible, and they don't connect to the sense of the discretionary effort model directly, right? Meaning if there's changes to the compensation, one's attitude and approach on a day-to-day basis to doing the work and satisfaction in the work doesn't change. But a construct around being proud of your work, proud of the company that you work for, and proud of the individual tasks, roles, responsibilities, and the way you approach it, well, that's something that we can consider in terms of the development of campaigns internally facing that are inexpensive. And we've worked with a lot of companies developing programs and putting programs in place for them. And I thought I'd share a few examples of them to let you see what are the kinds of things that people are doing and how do they work. Why is this all important? Of course, for some of you in the UK, you may be familiar with this organization, which was put together by the government in order to look at options to engaging the UK employee populations. And in their study and analysis, if you've got high engagement, i.e. you've got the more Joes than Johns, you can yield a 2 times annual profit increase, 2.5 times greater revenue growth, higher customer satisfaction, productivity, downtime, fewer accidents, turnover, and that their job brings out the most of their creative ideas, i.e. this is the quantitative and research-based feedback loop to the discretionary effort or the work proud model between John and Joe in the beginning. One really enjoys it and wants to work hard for it. So, what's happening in terms of programs that are out there? Pretty well all organizations have some combination of, an idea program, a well-being program. Maybe there's charitable giving, maybe there's employee referral, milestones, recognition, onboarding. What we tend to find in our experiences, again, depending on how sophisticated the client is, these are all seen as separate initiatives. there's one group in HR that's working on, some type of recognition, one other one's grouping doing milestones or service anniversaries, somebody else is trying to improve the onboarding experience. Maybe there's idea submission, depending upon, again, the company. Maybe there's a wellbeing program. So the first step we ask our, clients, companies is, well, is there a handbook for all these programs? Who's administering all these programs? Is there unified data to correlate whether one program is more successful from a return on investment, impact on the employee, impact on the business standpoint? Or are they all just run by separate groups? And it shouldn't be a surprise to any of you. Lots of separate groups, siloed programs, run by different parts of the organization, set up at different periods of time. It's not that it's bad, it's just less effective and significantly less effective. And it's not aligning to, in the eyes of the employees, with, well, if we're trying to make people proud of the company they work for, and if we're trying to make people have pride in the work that they do on a day-to-day basis, because we want to align people and we want to keep them connected and we want to make them feel encouraged and appreciated, and we want them to have a good sense of job satisfaction, and we ultimately want them to be more efficient and productive. Well, having all these different initiatives going on with different groups of people, with different messages, with different administration, maybe with different vendors, well, those two things don't correlate. So we say, let's look at all these programs through the lens of, how do these programs make people proud of the company? And if they don't, well, maybe we should change the program. Not to change the vendor, but let's change the program. Let's make sure that we're making an impact in the way that we want from these programs. And then how do they connect and align with each other? So here's a few examples, and I won't go into them. We'd happily post this call, or set up some time and give folks a more detailed view of them. But a few interesting case studies for the UK folks. They'll know this brand. Granted, everybody's struggling, but it's not going to be long, and we will begin to return back to normal. And at some point, hopefully earlier than later, we'll look back at this as a period of history that we've all lived through, and we'll return back to normal. So retail will be real. High street retail will be real again. Customers will turn up to stores. And we want experiences, with customer service and the customers being positive and on mission. And of course, in case of jewelry retail, we want to create these magical moments. So we better create magical moments for the employees if we expect them to create magical moments for their customers. So they had lots of separate programs, and we've brought them all together from an onboarding standpoint, and from a peer recognition standpoint, and a manager spot award standpoint, and an anniversary standpoint. And then they'd use this to also deploy messages from their corporate out. In the case of Macy's, as a US big retailer, they had a separate anniversary program and a fill out the card program, and you'd sort of hand it to your boss, and then some kind of store manager nomination program. And they were trying to do things somewhere else with, coaching. And while it didn't all happen overnight, but it couldn't, but getting organizations to change is not that easy. But over time, this is a 12+ year relationship. We brought all their programs together under one roof. The resultant impact was basically as follows. The impact on the employee experience side was utilizations were going up 2 times fold, 3 times fold relative to what they were doing historically. 2, if you consider the external environment that we're working in these days, technology, Instagram, Facebook, the almost 100% penetration of smartphones, handing out pieces of cards around and expecting people to fill out a form and hand the form in somewhere, and something's got to do something with that form. I mean, that's just arcane. I mean, it's just not happening anymore. So, they were meeting the population, the customer population, in this case, the customers, the employees, where they were at. Let's bring it better technology. Let's execute it really well. Let's bring all the things together in one unified place. Significant impact on their results. This is for the a retail food service population, bringing and focusing on safety elements, bringing gamification elements into the program together. So these are all examples. This is for a millennial population, if you know Blizzard, Activision. These are the big game makers. This is classic younger populations working behind computers. They love the recognition because it's very natural from their Instagram, Facebook, TikTok worlds to transition into one that was designed by now their company. Right? Designed by their company to elicit pride in the company and its purpose, and then the sharing of recognition easily in a natural manner, pride in their achievements, because, well, who's going to recognize your achievement? A peer or a manager? And the more frequent, the better, we'd say, within reason. So we're building these programs to specification, but incorporating what are traditional and existing recognition processes and procedures, but aligning them together and aligning them under a banner that says, do these experiences that we're creating cause employees to become proud of the company they work for and connected to its mission and values and its purpose? And are we encouraging that feedback loop so that peers and managers can recognize the small achievements and the larger achievements that employees are delivering in order to give them a sense of satisfaction that they must be doing a good job? And if they're doing a good job, the tendency is to say, well, I like doing a good job because that's a human nature aspect. So happy to give some examples if we want to talk after, either post this, we'll do some follow-ups if you wanted to look at some of those programs in a bit more detail, but I wanted to give people a bit of a framework and a construct for how technology is playing a role in connecting employees and connecting employees to the purpose of the business, and then providing mechanisms by which it's easy to share, acknowledge, and provide a sense of appreciation for accomplishments, from the small day-to-day to the larger ones, leveraging technology. So I'll pass it back, Mike Winters, to you to field any questions to Mike Rose or I.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael Rose and Michael Levy, for your contributions thus far. So now we'll begin a quick Q&A part of the session. We have a number of questions to go through. Just as a reminder, we are set to finish at 4 p.m. However, we do have the facility to overrun until 4:15 if there are a significant amount of questions. So first question, which I think would probably be appropriate to put this out to both of you, maybe Michael Rose to kick off. The question is, what are the measurables and ROI impacts of monetary versus non-monetary recognition?
Yeah, well, I suppose it depends what you're after. And I think in one of the main reasons why people are putting recognition in is to improve levels of engagement, and it's finding the measure that you've got. So to the extent to which people are using engagement surveys, attitude surveys, typically what you would do, and typically you'd see this, and the Gallup one was a good example, is that you would actually expect to see, by putting in recognition programs, that a recognition approach, that the engagement scores, particularly around recognition, will go up. I would caution against measuring the number of recognition events. So I don't think you should quota recognition, and I don't think you should have budgets which are saying, we expect you to recognize at least this percentage. I think those are easy measures, but I don't think they're measuring an effective and impactful outcome. So I think you have to be careful what you do. So for recognition, I'd be looking at levels of engagement from engagement scores. And obviously, as your engagement scores go up, you would expect to see some of the key metrics around those, and Michael mentioned a few earlier, that to go up. On the monetary side, well, yes, it could be on engagement as well, although there are the two measures in engagement surveys that always come out low are compensation and communications. For whatever reason, they always are. I think certainly on incentives, I'm not sure whether financial incentives can be tracked well anyway. I suppose underneath all of this is the belief system that sits in the leadership of the organization, so that because the monetary elements are more definable and clear, and we can say, well, we can see an action at the end, and we can see we've paid some money, so we'll assume that there was a causal relationship, and we're happy with that financial metric ratio. Whether there was actually a causal relationship or not, it is rather more questionable. So I'm happy on the recognition side, and I've always grappled to say, well, can we really get a good measure on financial, salary and bonus changes? But we have to look at what we're trying to achieve first, and then build in the change metric into that original design.
Thanks, Michael. Rose. Michael Eve, do you want a quick comment on that?
Only that they each have a role to play in the development of a total strategy. That is the feedback loops, which might be in recognition or appreciation, accomplishment, have a role to play, as do the application of monetary type awards, both through a program like this and through the various compensation. It's about creating a total experience for the employee that has more frequent day-to-day acknowledgement of achievements, frequent, day-to-day, week-to-week senses of appreciation that what you're doing is helping and meaningful, in conjunction with maybe monetary awards at certain levels for certain behaviors that you want that employee to repeat.
Thanks, Michael. This is a specific one for online rewards, so Michael Levy to respond. Can the online rewards platform be customized to integrate with existing programs?
Yes, so the technology component of these programs are going to sit behind internal HRIS systems and are integrated into those HRIS systems. Across our 20 years, we've worked with pretty well every HRIS system that is out there, and that to the employee, they would not see us as a separate or additional vendor. That's something that is seamlessly integrated into the tools that already exist. In terms of the mobile experience, which we see consistently driving increased utilization, particularly for frontline employees and deskless employees. That's a freestanding technology, but again, that technology service is integrated into the HRIS systems of the employer so that it all feels part of one system to the employee and managers.
Okay, thanks, Michael Levy. This next one for Michael Rose. Regarding strategic recognition, are more companies moving towards a more structured approach?
More structured approach. I suppose I might argue slightly the opposite. As I think the point that you've got to get balance right is between the what should be the same and what should be different. And I think if you've got some clear statements around purpose and values, and the kind of culture of the organization, then one of the things organizations certainly are doing is building recognition which is reinforcing those, and therefore they're using things like purpose and values as the sort of umbrella driver, which is saying we're primarily looking at recognizing people within that. So to the extent to which they are using not necessarily a structured approach, but a consistent approach, which may be the same thing, then that certainly is the case. But I think the thing that is happening in particular is the other end, which is actually people understanding the concept of having to trying to get a recognition culture. And with the recognition culture, if you go back to my journey model, then actually making sure you are embedding the kind of good recognition behaviors within the organization at a behavioral level and at a sort of competence level, making sure that those competences exist, which would perhaps be different in different places, and then building through the program into kind of appropriate, consistent online models and models that are using the technologies that are available to that work in your organization to sort of encourage the right model for that business. So I'm not sure whether that may be structured and consistent or a similar thing. That's the way I'd answer it.
Thanks, Michael. I think we should put this next one out to both of you. Why do you think some employers still struggle to provide sufficient recognition of achievement to the individual, both informal and formal? Michael Levy, do you want to kick that one off?
Sure. So as humans, we always make the best decisions that we think we can make, but we're always looking at it from our own set of eyes, as opposed to necessarily, in this case, those of the employee populations. Fair enough, it's our only decision-making reference. However, and that causes a lot of the programs that we see or have seen and come up against to be very conservative and very traditional and very old school. Sometimes you've got executive leadership that's, still, hey, they ought to be lucky they got a job kind of, attitude and perspective, and pay is the only, motivator that people work by. And perhaps you're hearing a little bit of the perspective of that individual when they're making those particular comments. But what we've seen in 100% of circumstances is every time we open up these programs to the employee populations, it is those same executives and leaders that go, wow, that was surprising. I didn't think that they'd be, interacting in that way. And the things that made me feel uncomfortable and anxious about opening up for sort of social recognition and peer-to-peer and encouraging those sort of new informal feedback loops and layering them together. In every situation, they're surprised at how well it's used, how easy it is to deploy and get populations to do it naturally, how positive the messages and impact it's having, how inexpensive it is to actually go ahead and deploy these kinds of programs. And I mean, it's somewhat confusing as to, well, how could you think it's going to be difficult to do when we've had Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and the others train our populations to how to operate and behave in these sort of social worlds and constructs. But the nice part, I guess, of the programs that we're building and deploying is because these are siloed programs for each individual company, and they have walls around it, so you can only see on the inside and you cannot be anonymous. The way in which people interact and behave in the program is surprisingly positive in so far as it's always nice feedback, it's always open, it's always being shared, and it's being very well received. So, I think that the wind is behind us in terms of the trend towards doing these programs, but there's a reticency and conservatism of the unknown, and that's usually coming from, perspectives that, personal perspectives, as opposed to what the actual data and what we're seeing out in the real world marketplaces are telling us.
Thanks, Michael. Michael Rose?
Yeah, just a quickie. I think on the behavioral side, I mean, the reason why I like the definition of catching people doing something right is because actually we seem to be hardwired programmed to catch people doing something wrong. It's something about our need for order and survival in the Stone Age and the rest. And I think actually some managers just find it difficult to look someone in the eye and say, thank you very much, that was a great job, let me tell you why. And actually they just don't know how to do it. And the answer is actually it's very easy to coach and provide guidelines as how to do it. And but I think often, like many aspects of certain areas of management training, I don't think it's something that's really built in very effectively, but it is an easy thing to coach. There's some research showing that. But I think that's one of the problems. But in practice, I agree with Michael, actually. If you've got a good program running, be it the informal or more formal, and it builds success, and people actually then, once they might have been reticent, but actually you can see it working. But ultimately, you have to accept that you will have different usage in different parts of the organization. But the more you can recognize people overall, then by far the better it is.
Thanks, Michael. Just to let everyone know, look, we've just come up to the hour point or approaching. Anyone that has to break off now, we thank you for attending. However, we still have time to probably fit in maybe 2 or 3 more questions quickly. So anyone that wishes to stay on, you're more than welcome, and we appreciate that. Question for Michael Levy: will technology have an even greater role to play in recognition after COVID-19 as more employees and companies explore remote working?
I think we all know with certainty that's going to be the case. The extent of it will be dependent upon what industry you're in and the culture of the organization. But I think we've all now had a surprising dry run of how productive people can be working from their own homes. So I don't imagine that that's going to change. And I've already had some employees, even within our small company of 70, say, I'm not anxious to be coming back to the office. Can I work more from home as the United States, as Dallas starts to open up? People can start to return to their offices. So you've got 2 factors. One is the post-COVID-19 experience and the fact that people have now had not just a few days, but a month or so working remotely and being effective and productive, and then saying, well, how do you create emotional connection points when they're not there? So certainly the role of technology and the role of the mobile technology and social communication tools are going to remain and potentially grow. And I think you've also got significant deskless populations that are out there who you need means and mechanisms by which you can connect and reach out to them, and their devices in their pockets are really the ideal avenue by which you can at least try and build some connections and rapport. Nothing's as good as getting a handshake and a hug and a clap round of applause in front of your peers, of course, but that's hard to execute. And certainly very hard, if not impossible, to execute at any kind of scale. But we've got a client whose COO not too long ago did a recognition appreciation to the population, under this difficult times, and sharing appreciation out. And 10,000 employees signed up and activated their accounts in the programs immediately following, i.e. the population yearns for some feedback and appreciation from their peers day to day, from their managers periodically, and from leadership. And you can imagine leadership's perspective from that point of view going, wow, well, they're really obviously listening to me. Well, yes, they are. They're following you and they want to connect with you and they want to feel that connection. Look at how, leaders of the political world now leverage social media and technology to try and build connectivity with their constituents. Some of them do great jobs at it. We can make comments about whether we like what they say, but we can, without doubt, recognize that they're using these vehicles to create more personalized connection points, with their constituents. So technology is going to play an ever greater role in it, and I'm sure that COVID is going to only, perhaps accelerate the take-up rates again when people slowly begin to return to at least normal business functions.
Okay, thanks. Another topical question. Michael Rose this time. Do you think pride and purpose in the workplace will be even more resonant after the current crisis we're all living through?
Well, I think there's no question, it seems to me, of the purpose point, and I sort of tried to allude to that a little bit in my intro on it, which is that the crisis we're going through seems to me to be kind of forcing the issue around that change in purpose, in that, as we see what's happening with some organizations, we're now seeing collaboration between what would have been competing organizations to jointly or severally to help achieve an outcome, positive outcome for the society at large. That's happening. We're also seeing organizations seeking to make their resources available in different ways to help the community. We've seen, donations and so on and so forth. So it seems to me that there's no question that one of the outcomes of this crisis will be many organizations, and in fact I've already talked to a few of my clients about this point, they're talking to me on this, to rethink what is our purpose and how we should be acting, because we are finding we are needing to act and want to act in a way which is we are acting as individuals and as a collective group of people who want to do the right thing for the society within which we are operating. Balancing, obviously, that does include the shareholders as well, of course. So I think that's absolutely the case, and I'm sure that's an outcome. On the pride point, I think it's interesting, isn't it, on the pride? I mean, I think, we all stand, I don't know whether everybody on this call does, we stand outside at 8 o'clock on a Thursday and clap for the NHS and so on. I think people can take a lot of pride in different groups of people, and maybe we'll start to see different members of society and roles in different ways. So I suppose that should follow. But the area that I'm most interested in, I think, is this whole purpose one.
Thanks, Michael. Got another question here. What kind of leaders do we need to build appreciation and a proud culture, and which competencies are essential for those leaders?
Shall I start off? I have to say it's a very good question, and it's not one I haven't really thought about too much, but I suppose the obvious things as I think about it would be, I mean, team orientated must be the case. I mean, it's the leader that recognizes that it's the totality of the interrelationship between all the roles in the organization and the way people work. So I'm not quite sure what that competency is, but it's certainly a team orientation, I suppose, or a sharing orientation. I guess it's got to be somebody who's going to be, it's got to be a level of confidence, personal confidence and ability, but probably not sort of arrogance and me too, meism, I suppose. But I suppose it's also somebody who thinks widely around the subject and doesn't conform to the narrow perspectives of some beliefs about we have to pay people to incentivize them, otherwise they won't work hard. Now, I'm not sure what the competency is there, but I suppose for me, it's somebody who's kind of read the memo. That's about all I can say, I'm afraid. I don't know, Michael, if you've got any other thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I'll put it in case in point by example. Deployment for company A and deployment for company B, and the ultimate technology solution that was put in place for both of them similar. And with similar objectives. But the huge delta between the relative impact of company A versus company B in terms of the program's impact on the population, the speed and the take-up rate, the way in which it was being utilized, was the way in which leadership at all levels of that organization were being trained and coached. As Michael Rose had said earlier, and as we've seen in the real world, the technology of the program itself is actually designed to be seamless and not seen and not the focus. It's not about the technology at all. It's actually about the experiences that are happening that the technology is facilitating. So, to the leader question, there was substantial conservatism, uncertainty, fear and trepidation of what delving into this path of more open feedback recognition type systems might have within an organization, and the fear of the unknown. The great HR business leaders in that group spent quite a bit of time pre-marketing the program to the population before it was launched. Why is recognition important? Why is it important to appreciate people? How impactful you can be as a business leader. And after that was done, and then the launch of the program and the success, now the program is self-propelling. Now, programs will still always need a bit of encouragement and alignment, but the power of the program, once correctly positioned and established in the minds of the population, gets leaders to go, wow, recognition's kind of good. People like it when I recognize. I've seen all these people commenting on my posts, and they're sharing my statements. I.e., it's not necessarily, as much of a question of, well, what are the competencies of the leader? Not that it's not a relevant question. It's more, how can we help the leadership be comfortable that recognition is actually a positive attribute, and that those leaders will be seen to be great leaders and inspiring leaders, and that those leaders shouldn't be fearful of that openness that the world of social media is. partly because this is the world we live in now, and the genie's out of the bottle, it's not going back. And the questions of, well, why were they fearful and what were they fearful of happening can be overcome by some training, but nothing overcomes it better than actually having them deploy and having them do this sort of recognition and see the relative impact that recognition has on the people that they're looking to influence. And they then turn around and become champions, and away it goes. It can be self-fulfilling. So I think it's a question of how do you get the flint and the spark going within the organization, and then it will self-propel, surprisingly so. You know, again, back to my earlier point, because the social media giants have already trained our populations. This is a natural way to provide feedback and communicate. You know, we use the word recognition on this call, but it's kind of going beyond that, right? It's the feedback loops and the way in which people are communicating and talking, and we're trying to spin it in a way that says, let's have them talk about topics that make them proud of the company and proud of the work that they do. That's our job together from the HR standpoint. We're trying to turn the dialogue in a certain manner. The way the dialogue is already happening, that's pretty natural and spins up quickly. So hopefully
Okay.
I extended a bit, but hopefully that answered your question. It's a good question.
That's great. Thanks, though. Thank you for your contributions, Michael Levy, Michael Rose. Useful juncture to finish with the Q&A session. So our time's nearly up. Any questions not answered will be responded to in the post-event communications. A reminder to indicate a recording of the full session will be available, I think, probably in the next 24 to 48 business hours. If you wish to revisit the material or pass on to colleagues, etc. So on behalf of Online Rewards, thank you. We know your time is very valuable. We appreciate you attending today and taking time out of your calendars. We hope you found it both informative and thought-provoking. Please feel free to contact me, Michael Winters, with any further questions or queries arising out of today's session, or indeed Michael Rose or Michael Levy. I'm sure they'll be happy to respond. I'd like to leave you with a quote from the legendary American football coach and all-round humanitarian, Vince Lombardi, and it goes like this: individual commitment to a group effort. That is what makes a team work, a company work, a society work, a civilization work. So nothing further to say apart from stay safe and healthy in these troubled times. Wishing you every success for the remainder of 2020, and until the next time, goodbye everyone.